All right, welcome back. You're back for some more graphing of microeconomics. Last time we left off with this perfect competition, and we even did this little side note about what a subsidy would do. So we'll pick up today with kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, which is the monopoly. And of course, perfect competition, we had lots of vendors. They all sold exactly the same thing. In a monopoly, we've got one vendor, and they're the only ones who sell it. It's only one firm selling this thing. The monopoly is going to face the same sort of cost curves that we saw with the perfectly competitive, with that rising marginal cost and a decreasing and then increasing average total cost. And now the big difference, though, is that as the only firm, there's no longer this other graph over here of market supply and market demand with a price that we take, right? Because we are the whole market. So the monopoly is the only thing, and so they aren't price takers like the perfectly competitive firm. In this case, the only thing restricting how many of whatever it is they're selling they're going to be able to sell is the actual market demand. So let me draw a demand curve. So if we draw that demand curve, what we see here is that we still have a point where marginal cost equals marginal benefit, and that would be that socially efficient point. Socially efficient. Helps if you spell right. Efficient. All right. So that's that socially efficient point, and that's ideally where we want to produce, but as you'll see in a second, that's not really where the unregulated monopoly is going to actually produce. Instead, what they're going to do is produce, like we said before, where did we say it? We're going to produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Where is it? There it is. It's up here somewhere. There we go. We're always going to produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. In this case, demand is not the marginal revenue. Here it was because the price that you sell at is the price that you sell at is, you're going to get the same amount for every single one, so it doesn't matter. So the revenue stays the same. But here we've got a different scenario. And let's just kind of put some numbers to it, make up our own numbers here so you can kind of get the idea. You know, maybe if I sell, I'll call this 1. There we go. Let's call this 1 here. If I sell one of them, I might be able to sell it at, let's say, $10. And if I try sell 2 of them, though, if I want to sell 2, the market is going to require that I probably sell them at a little bit lower price. And I know this isn't graphically accurate, but let's call that price 9. So if we think about it, if the price is 10, the quantity that I'll be able to sell is 1, and so let's see if I got a little more space over here. So my total revenue is 10. If I lower my price to 9, I can sell 2 of them, and my total revenue is 18. So my marginal revenue as I went from 1 to 2 was 8. As I went from 0 to 1, I went from making 0 money to 10. And then as I went from 1 to 2, I only made 8, and if I went to, say, 3, let's just put that over there and pretend that that's something like that, and that's maybe all the way down to $8. If I sell 3, if I sell 3, there we go, at $8, let's pretend that's that point there. If that's the case, then my total revenue would be 24, and my marginal revenue, the difference between selling 2 and 3, is only 6. And so what you'll see, and I don't really want to, I'm going to erase this stuff off of here, and I'm not going to get into the calculus proof of this, but you're welcome to look it up. I saw a great one on Khan Academy at one point. That was just a nice simple run through of this proof. Hang on, let me pause that. I'm getting a call. Okay, so what I was saying is that I'm not going to show a proof of this. You can look one up, but the marginal revenue curve is actually, if I can draw this right, it's downward sloping just like the demand curve, but it's actually got twice the negative slope. It's a little more steep than that. Let me try to draw that a little bit better. All right. There's a couple things that I want to point out about this marginal revenue curve. So we'll call this marginal revenue. Now I've got a point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this is the quantity that the monopoly, I'll call it Q sub M, that the monopoly is actually going to produce. If they're producing at that quantity, this right here, where that quantity is equal to the average total cost curve, that's going to be we'll call that the cost. I'll call it P sub C. And but the price that they're actually going to be able to sell at, if I'm only selling that many of them, and I'm going to sell it as high a price I can actually sell it at a pretty high price. So that's the monopoly price there, and what I get is a pretty large economic profit. And because there's no other firms coming into this market, there's nothing that's going to change this, so monopolies are going to produce at a quantity that is less than the socially efficient amount, and they are going to earn an economic profit. And ultimately that means we're going to have a smaller consumer surplus than we would before, and actually the producer surplus is pretty large. There's one other thing that I really would like to talk about with this marginal revenue curve, because it'll probably come up at some point. And that is that there are some significant points along this. Well, there's one significant point here where marginal revenue equals 0. And if I follow that up, that gives me a point on my demand curve. Now, at that point, demand is unitary elastic. Up until that point, so for this whole stretch of the curve, demand must be elastic. And how do I know that? Well, up until this point, if I lowered my price, as I'm lowering my price, my total revenue is still going up, and I know that because my marginal revenue, so I'm actually making some additional revenue by, if I were to produce this one over here. That's what that means. So as long as my marginal revenue is greater than 0, that means by lowering my price along here, I was actually able to make higher revenue, and the only way that's possible is if the quantity that I'm able to sell grows faster than the reduction in price. And then from this point on, oh, that was horrible. Let me try that again. From this point on, all the way down the rest of that demand curve, that would be inelastic demand. Because from this point on, if I produce more, if I lower my price in order to sell more, I'm actually lowering my total revenue because my marginal revenue is negative. And the only way that happens is if the price the drop in price is a greater percentage than I lose in quantity. So it's a kind of an important thing there to keep in mind. You may see a question or two about that. That at this point we're at unitary elastic. At this point we're always elastic, and down here we would be inelastic. There's one other thing that we really should mention when we're talking about a monopoly. And to be honest, I think this graph is too cluttered for me to continue. So I'm going to really quickly, it's good practice anyways, draw another monopoly case. So there's my marginal cost. There's my average total cost. Not perfect. Looks like that point's actually a little lower. And of course it should intersect at the lowest point. And by the way, that point, as it is with all of them, I think I mentioned it before, that's the lowest cost of production. That's the most productively efficient point. But then we're going to draw in a demand curve, and at half that negative slope I'm going to draw in a marginal revenue curve. Now this time it happened to hit right there. That's just the magic of my drawing more than anything else. Now, we said before that we are going to always produce until marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And so I've kind of like cluttered up that point there, but there's that point of marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And if I did that, the profit I'm making is the difference between the average total cost and the average total cost, and so my cost per unit, and the price that I'm actually able to sell it. So this is my normal scenario of a monopoly getting some profit. There is a scenario where a monopoly could make even more money, and we might actually produce all the way to let's see, this point here. If for some reason I was able to perfectly price discriminate. In other words, I would be able to charge the first customer as much as I wanted, charge the second customer, oh, I'm sorry, I drew the wrong point on my graph. I would produce until this point here, because from that point on, yeah, okay. Sorry, had to think there, brain fart. If I could charge the first customer, this price, and I could charge my second customer a little less price, and I could charge the next customer that I get a lower price because he'd be willing to pay that, and I could charge basically every customer exactly the most that they'd be willing to pay. That would be perfect price discrimination. Well, then I might want to keep selling until I get to this point over here, where I could still sell this next one right here for more than it cost me to make it. And so I would produce all the way until that point there, and then my profit is going to be much, much larger, because I'm going to be able to profit, let's see, I'm going to be able to profit, this one I'm able to charge that much, and it only cost me that much to make. Actually, I guess I could also draw it like this. This is how much my average one cost to make at that point. And I was able to sell one at this price, and sell another at this price, and sell another at this price, and so on, and so on. And I actually be able to get a much larger profit. And so then I would actually produce all the way until this point here. And so that's price discrimination, which is discrimination. By the way, very illegal, and you could get in a lot of trouble for that, unless you can find out a creative way around those laws. So there's the monopoly. I just wanted to mention that price discrimination and the fact that you could get a much larger profit if you can find a way to perfectly price discriminate.